What's up, movie crew? Today is going to be a slightly different video, and I thought I'd go ahead and do this one just because I had a lot of people asking and it was sort of requested. But before I get started, if you are new to this channel, my name is Luke, this is Let's Watch a Movie, and if you're into anything cinema and physical media related, you've come to the right place, so hit that subscribe button. Emphasis on hitting that subscribe button. I am almost at 1,000 subscribers, and at 1K subs, there will be a 5 Steelbook giveaway. Alright, so a while back, I did a ranking for my top 5 movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And surprisingly, I didn't have really anyone trolling, but I did have a couple of people ask, why do I prefer Avengers Endgame to Avengers Infinity War? Because for a lot of people, Infinity War is a favorite. Like, not only is it like some people's favorite MCU movie, for a lot of those where it's not their number one MCU movie, it is their number one Avengers movie. And I'm not going to argue that. But for me personally, I like Endgame for a lot of reasons. Alright, so I'm going to start off with the things that I think both these movies got right, what I think they got wrong, and then I'm going to start giving my opinion on what I think with both movies. Alright, so Infinity War came out late April 2018. It got pushed up so that it has the same release date across the board to avoid spoilers. Because they said this movie is going to end on a cliffhanger. They have already confirmed not everyone's making it out alive with this one. So the things this movie got right, the stakes are high. So you don't get your typical bright and colorful, everyone throwing quips at one another. You've got a slightly darker movie. You've got a more serious movie. That's what this had to be. Thanos has been getting built up since Avengers in 2012, and now he's got to do his thing. He's now collected the stones. It's time for him to put his plan into action. That part they did right. In this one of the first people you see him take care of is Loki. Proving his point. What better way to prove that you're a serious threat than to kill a god in the beginning of the movie? You also see him take on Hulk, and that messes with Hulk so badly on a psychological level that Bruce Banner cannot become the Hulk in this movie. You also have to have the first face-to-face meeting between the Avengers and the Guardians. For the most part, the Guardians have been very standalone in the MCU leading up to this movie. So now, you've got to see what happens when the Guardians and the Avengers come face-to-face. All of that stuff, Infinity War did right. Endgame. This movie had to deliver on the cliffhanger that we got with Infinity War. It also had to explain why we didn't see Scott Lang. Ant-Man and the Wasp was its own movie that was running concurrently timeline-wise with Infinity War. So this movie had to bring Scott Lang into the fold. This movie also had to explain Captain Marvel's absence. So you've got 2 movies that were released after Infinity War. So this movie not only had to follow up Infinity War, it also had to fill in some holes that were there courtesy of Ant-Man and the Wasp and Captain Marvel. This movie did that. We also knew that this was going to be the end of what was now known as the Infinity Saga. However, we already knew there was going to be a Phase 4, and we knew that there was going to be a new Spider-Man movie a mere months after this release. It did that well. No issues there. This also had to deal with the aftermath of what Thanos did in Infinity War. And I think it did that pretty well too. But this movie had to have something that the other MCU movies, in my opinion, have not had other than Infinity War. And it had to have stakes that were pretty much irreversible. We had to see the end for some of these characters. Not just because the movie's called Endgame, but we are now approaching the end for some of these people. All right, so those are my pros for both of these. My cons now. With Infinity War, there were some characters that were kind of standoffish that we didn't really get to see a further meshing of. With Black Panther, even though he was in Civil War, the rest of the characters were not in there, and the first Black Panther movie is kind of its own thing. And I think they could have done a better job of integrating what we got with Black Panther to what we get with this. Another personal issue of mine is by the end of the movie, Thanos has snapped his finger. Spoiler alert for those that have not seen Infinity War, but half of the team is now gone. All right. I had been complaining for years that it felt like there weren't any real stakes in the MCU, and we finally get it, but here's the problem. And part of it is Disney's fault. Some of the characters you see get dusted. One of them, Spider-Man. We already know that not only are we getting a sequel to Homecoming, it's coming out 2 months after what was still the untitled Infinity War follow-up. So it's like, all right, well, we know this is going to be temporary now because you've just blipped someone that we know is coming back. Another issue was some of the Guardians get dusted. We know that we're getting a Guardians of the Galaxy 3. This is where they kind of screwed up. They never should have announced some of the movies that they had announced until after Endgame's release. And unfortunately, because of Spider-Man still being made by Sony, we get that release date 2 months after Endgame, and we already know that these people are coming back. So my thoughts with them not having real risk and real stakes in the movie, it's like, oh, they're just going to undo everything and everyone's going to live happily ever after. That was my thoughts going into Endgame. It's okay to leave a gut punch at the end of a movie, but if it just feels like they're going to undo everything and everything's going to be all great and peachy and all that stuff by the end of this follow-up, that's not a good follow-up. So seeing these two back-to-back, it makes sense, but at the time, I was not okay with that. All right, so with Endgame, there's very little on this one that most of my complaints with this are kind of more nitpicks than anything else. How they brought Captain Marvel in and how they used her leading up to the final fight, they could have done better. Hands down, that part could have been done a lot better. Scott Lang coming back. Spoiler alerts for those that haven't seen it, but Scott Lang does not get dusted. Hank Pym has him go in the quantum realm so they can figure out some stuff and learn more about the quantum realm. And while Scott is in the quantum realm, Hank is one of the people that gets dusted, and Scott Lang is stuck in the quantum realm for 5 years. I will have a pinned comment down below for my spoiler review of Ant-Man, where I explain why I did not like my complaints on that part. But him coming back and explaining the quantum realm to everyone, and then like how he comes back, I gotta say, how he comes back where a rat just randomly comes across a button and Scott comes popping out of the quantum realm, that was good. We needed a couple of laughs here and there because Infinity War and Endgame needed to be serious. And with this being a 3-hour movie, you need to have something to build up to. So there's that. So again, most of my complaints on this one are kind of nitpicks. But the real question is, why do I prefer Endgame to Infinity War? And the biggest reason is that I feel like Endgame had more going on it. I think Endgame had its back against the wall a lot more than Infinity War did. We knew that we were going to eventually get the Avengers and the Guardians in the same movie, and Infinity War did a good job with that. But Infinity War only had to build up to Endgame. Captain Marvel and Ant-Man and the Wasp kind of did their own things, meaning Infinity War didn't have to do anything with those. It could just be its own thing, and that's that. Endgame had to be a follow-up to Infinity War, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and Captain Marvel, while we already know that Spider-Man Far From Home is only a couple months away, and build up to what's coming after Endgame. We knew that this was not going to be the end of the MCU. We already knew there was going to be a Phase 4. They were just waiting for Endgame to come out before we find out what exactly entails in Phase 4 and Phase 5. So Endgame had not only to follow up the events that happened in Infinity War, it had to tease what was coming without feeling like a glorified trailer. It still needed to be a movie. It still had to be a conclusion. So when you're both a conclusion and teasing what's ahead, that is not an easy combination. And this movie did that. And that's one of the reasons why I prefer Endgame. Another reason why I prefer Endgame is with the announcements that we were going to get Guardians of the Galaxy 3 and Spider-Man Far From Home not only was already announced, but had a release date. That made me going into Endgame thinking, all right, so they're just going to undo what Thanos did. He's going to go away and we'll probably see him again in a future movie. They did not do that. The stakes were still high in Endgame. We see characters die that we will not see again. At least not these versions. With the second saga being the multiverse saga, yes, we could see some of these actors come back and play a different version of characters, but some of these characters we're not going to see again. And if we do see them again, it's not going to be, like, spoiler alert, we're not going to see Iron Man again. Could we see Robert Downey Jr. come back and play a different version of Iron Man? Yes. Could we see like a flashback scene between him and Rhodey in whatever they're doing with Armor Wars? Likely. Are we going to see a follow-up of what happens with him after Endgame? No. So it did that very well. And another tease that we got before Endgame was that unlike other MCU movies, this would not have a post-credit scene. And let's be honest here, a lot of people watch Marvel movies for those post-credit scenes. So you're going into a movie knowing once the credits are done rolling, that's it. And both times I saw Endgame in theaters, it was a packed theater. And the second time I saw it, it had been out a couple weeks at this point. And it still managed to bring in people. You know that the people that I saw it with the second time around had already seen the movie more than once. and everyone was still cheering and laughing and gasping and feeling emotionally deflated emotionally deflated in a good way after seeing the movie. And I know that I'm not the only one that felt a little disappointed with how they ended Infinity War. Yes, though retroactively, some people are probably like, all right, that makes sense. For me, it's still, had they dusted off one of the original Avengers, I think I would have been a little more invested in Endgame than I initially was. And I probably would have Infinity War a little bit higher up on my rankings. But because we already knew going in, and again, you got Disney and Sony to blame on those, that some of these characters are going to continue. It kind of took away what we were getting with Endgame. And Endgame definitely alleviated any issues that I had. And like I've said, if you haven't seen some of my movie reviews before, I constantly complain about runtimes. Like, why is this movie 2.5 hours long? Why is this movie 3 hours long? Why is this movie 4 hours long? But Endgame was 3 hours and 4 minutes, I think, was the final runtime. One, it earned it. It had 10 years or 11 years, I guess, of building everything up for a payoff. It had to follow up Infinity War. It had to set up Phase 4. And it did all of that stuff, and it was a good beginning, middle, end for its own movie, as well as being the conclusion to the Infinity Saga. So, hopefully that explains everything. I feel like I've been talking a lot more than what I was expecting to. But long story short, I just feel like after seeing both movies and rewatching them, Endgame still leaves an emotional toll on me where Infinity War doesn't. And had we not known about Far From Home and Guardians of the Galaxy 3 before seeing Infinity War, I think I would have probably liked Infinity War a little bit more, and it would have definitely had me more excited for Endgame than I initially was. But also, some of the stuff that does happen in Infinity War does kind of get undone a little early on with Endgame than I was kind of hoping to see. So yes, Infinity War is still a great movie. I am not saying it's a bad movie. I'm just saying, me personally, I still prefer Endgame, and I stand behind those thoughts. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up because this video is a lot longer than I was expecting it to be. If you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button. You like what you see, leave a thumbs up. Comment down below your thoughts on Infinity War and Endgame. And I know a lot of you are going to disagree with me. I definitely am open to hearing people's reasons why they prefer Infinity War. I am not saying it's a bad movie. I'm just saying I prefer Endgame. Simple as that. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you all for watching, and tune in next time.